Good morning and welcome. We are so excited that you weathered the weather. We thank you very much for being here and hope you've enjoyed some breakfast and some time hanging out with your peers, maybe some of our local business professionals that are in the room, and of course the congressmen. I want to begin this morning by sharing a little bit about the gentleman who has blessed us today with coming to this forum and spending some time with you and answering some of your questions. A little bit about Mr. Hurt. Of course, you know that he currently represents Virginia's 5th District here in the House of Representatives. He's a member of the Financial Services Committee, which has jurisdiction, as we know, over all aspects of the nation's financial and housing sectors, which today is a very important role. The committee will play an important role in moving our economy forward, is our hope. He is also the Vice Chairman of the Subcommittee on Insurance, Housing, and Community Opportunity, and a member of the Subcommittee on Capital Markets and Government-Sponsored Enterprises. So School of Business students, both from Lynchburg College, our special guest, and School of Business students from Liberty University, you have a vested interest in the work that Congressman Hurt is doing each day for us. He is a native of Pittsylvania County. He began his time in public service in 2001 as a member of Chatham Town Council. From 2002 to 2007, Mr. Hurt served in the Virginia House of Delegates, representing parts of Pittsylvania County, Henry County, and the city of Martinsville. Starting in 2008, Mr. Hurt represented the 19th District in the Senate of Virginia for 2 years, which includes the city of Daniel, Pittsylvania County, Franklin County, and part of Campbell County. He received his college education at Hampden-Sydney College in '91 and his law degree from Mississippi College School of Law in 1995. He was engaged in general law practice until 2010 in the courthouse town of Chatham. He lives in Chatham, Virginia with his wife Kathy and their 3 sons, Charles, Clement, and John. Would you join me now in welcoming Congressman Hurt?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. And I want to thank each of you all for being here. I understand that that while you have very busy schedules, it's not always something we can expect to have everybody up bright and early at 7 o'clock in the morning here on a college campus. So I thank you for that. I thank you for coming out this morning. I thank you for the invitation. I want to also thank you for the opportunity to represent you. Those of you all who are residents here of the 5th District, I want to thank you for that opportunity. It's a great privilege and it's an honor to be able to represent you during such really an exciting time, I think, in the history of our country, an important time in the history of our country. And I will talk a little bit about some of the challenges we face in a moment. As many of you all will recall, we had a really big election in last November. The district, of course, runs from north of Charlottesville. The 5th District runs from Greene County all the way down to the North Carolina line on the other side of Danville, and runs from Martinsville, Virginia, all the way over to Lawrenceville, Virginia, in Brunswick County. And so it's 22 counties and cities. It's large. The whole district is larger than the entire state of New Jersey. So it's a very, very, very big district geographically, and it's diverse. It's diverse in as much as it is large, but it also has a lot of different interests. Down in places like Martinsville and Danville, we have proud history in manufacturing and textiles and furniture. We have, of course, across the south side, we have a history in tobacco. We still have a strong economy based on agriculture, and that stretches up through the eastern part of the district, through Farmville, and up into Nelson County and Greene County. We have a lot of wineries. In fact, this morning I'm going to be doing an agricultural roundtable in Albemarle County, and we'll be talking about some of the issues that are faced there. But we also have some more metropolitan areas. Places like Charlottesville and the University of Virginia are there. So it's a great district. It's as I said, it's got a proud history. When I think back on the history of some of the people that have lived in the 5th District, it's important to remember that Thomas Jefferson, of course, lived at Monticello, and he, of course, was a president of the United States, founder of the University of Virginia. But most important, was the author of our Declaration of Independence, which I think was a very important, interesting issue this past election, in as much as I think so much of what we saw during that election really was a yearning to try to get back to some of these founding principles that made this country great. The Declaration of Independence being a hallmark part of that founding. We also, of course, are home to Red Hill, which is in Charlotte County, not far from here, but that's where Patrick Henry's buried. So Patrick Henry, of course, was a firebrand, and I often say was the fuse that lit the revolution back in 1765 when he gave his Stamp Act speech. So we've got a real proud history here in the 5th District, going all the way back to our founding, and I'm reminded of that from time to time as I go about the important work of representing you all in Washington, D.C. Because I think in order for us to find our way forward, we've got to remember where we came from and what made this country great. And I think for many people, again, going back to the election, for many people think that we have gotten too far away. Is that a little better? We've gotten too far away from those founding principles. So what are the challenges that we face? Well, I think we face a couple of challenges. One, obviously, is the financial situation in Washington, D.C. We are spending $1.6 trillion every year that we don't have. That is our deficit. That means that for our entire budget, we are, which is $3.5 trillion to $4 trillion, 1.6 of that trillion dollars of that spending that's going on in Washington, D.C. is borrowed money. That's money that we do not have. It is, I think, something that threatens the future for this country. I think it's something that we should all be very, very concerned about. Unlike the states, the localities, businesses, your own personal life, where you balance your budget, you balance your checkbook. States have to balance their budgets. They can't spend more than they take in at any given time. Washington doesn't abide by that rule, and as a consequence, we are adding trillions of dollars to our debt every year as a consequence. Consider this, 40 cents on every dollar that's spent. Stop and think about what I'm saying. 40 cents on every dollar that is spent in Washington, D.C. is borrowed money. So stop and think about that. If you tried to run your own personal finances like that, if you tried to run your business like that, you wouldn't survive. You couldn't survive. But somehow we have managed to struggle to make that work because of the policies in Washington, D.C. We've got to change that. You stop and think about the debt that we have in this country. We have $14 trillion in debt that we've accumulated in this country. Now consider our annual budget, again, $3.5 trillion. We are in debt to the tune of $14 trillion. If you were to spread that out for every man, woman, and child in this country, that would amount to more than $42,000 for every man, woman, and child. So a child who was born today in Lynchburg, Virginia, a child that's born, I would say, with the greatest birthright that any person on earth could be blessed with, and that is an American birthright, American citizenship. Stop and think about it. They're also being saddled as a condition of their birth with $40,000 plus in debt. Now, I think we would all agree that that's wrong. It's not only wrong for us, but more important, it's wrong for the next generation. So what are we doing to change that? Well, what I think that this last election required, what I think the people expect as a consequence of this last election is that we stop spending money that we don't have, and that we get our debt reduced, and that we ultimately balance our budget. And so a lot of what you've seen in the last 90 days have been focused on eliminating wasteful spending, eliminating regulations that put a strain on businesses to the extent that they can't succeed. And it is our hope that by cutting the budget that we will end up ultimately balancing it in as short a time as possible. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we had to do was we had to adopt a budget for last year, and that was the fight that you might have been reading about here that's really consumed a tremendous amount of time here in the last 90 days. That was last year's budget that the last Congress completely failed to adopt. We ended up having to adopt a budget for the remainder of FY11. In Washington, our budgets run from October 1st to September 30th. So we were when I got elected and when I got sworn in January, we were a quarter of the way through last year's budget, which is FY11 again, which ends up in September 30th. So we had to cut. Ended up adopting a budget that cut $38 billion out of the budget for the next 6 months. It was not as much as I would have liked to have cut, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And so now that we've got that behind us, we can now focus on FY12. And that's what you also now may be reading about, and that's what's called the Path to Prosperity. It's the Paul Ryan's proposal for spending for FY12. And I think that it is a solid budget. I was proud to support it. And it does a few things. First of all, again, it focuses on discretionary spending. And let me explain that for a moment. In Washington, you have the budgeting process. You have discretionary spending, and you have what's called mandatory spending. Now, the difference, aside from the fact that it all comes out of the same place, and that's our wallets, that is the tax dollars, the difference is discretionary spending makes up about 40% of our budget, and that is for all the government programs that you can think of, funding of education, the agriculture department, the commerce department, the military. That's all considered discretionary spending. 60% of that budget is what we call mandatory spending, and that is money that is appropriated by law. That is that we set up a program that must be funded at a certain amount, and it must be done every year, and it's not subject to the actual appropriations process. And those programs are Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and then debt service. That altogether makes up 60% of our federal budget. And why is that important? It's important because as we try to reduce spending in this country, most people, I think, assume that, well, you could lay off some federal employees, and you can eliminate fraud, waste, and abuse. And we ought to be able to balance the budget that way. The problem is the hole is too deep. You can't balance the budget. You can't close that 40 cents on every dollar gap by just eliminating or laying off federal workers. You can't do it by just eliminating fraud, waste, and abuse. The truth of it is that you could eliminate the entire federal workforce and you'd still be $50 billion short of balancing the budget. Now stop and think about that for a second. You could eliminate the entire federal workforce and you'd still be $50 billion short of balancing the budget. That's how deep the hole is. So what does that tell you? You can't just do it in discretionary spending. And I think everybody agrees that. There's a lot of savings to be had there, but you're going to have to look at reforming these other programs, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and those are the three programs that constitute mandatory spending. Then you put debt service, that's something that's got to be paid, and there's no way to reform that. That's just simply going to have to be paid. So you look at those three programs. Well, that's where I think Budget Chairman Ryan's that is where he steps and has led boldly in an area that has got to be that's got to be reformed if we want to do two things: if we want to balance our budget, and two, if we want to save these programs for the future. Everybody agrees, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, that we cannot sustain the current course and have these programs survive. Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid have got to be reformed. And so this plan offers a solution for Medicare. What it does is it sets up for those who are less than 55 and younger. This would not affect anybody who's a current beneficiary or going to be in the Medicare program in the near future. But down the road, it sets up a program that would allow for what's called a premium subsidy. And that is that the recipients of the program would be able to choose from a menu of different programs, government-approved, mandated benefit programs, to be able to choose from among those programs, and then based on their income, based on their ability to pay, based on a number of factors, they would have a premium subsidy that they would go towards paying for that mandated coverage. And I think that it is a program that will save Medicare, provide higher quality medical care at a lower cost. And that's the key. And I think, especially for those of you all who are interested in human resources management, will recognize that one of the biggest elements of trying to attract good and quality employees is the medical benefits that employers offer. And I think we would all agree that we need to reduce the cost of health care in this country because of the growing cost to employers and to us as individuals. And it's obviously a huge cost, and it is the driver of our budget in Washington, D.C. So that would cover Medicare. Medicaid would go from being a program that would be administered by the federal government to more focused on block grants to the states. The states have asked for this flexibility. I think they have a proven record of having a much better chance and opportunity to reform Medicaid to make sure that it works efficiently, that it is administered in a fair way to people who need it as part of a safety net. And so I think that too will end up saving us taxpayer dollars. And then finally, Social Security. The Paul Ryan Plan on Social Security instructs the committees of jurisdiction to go to work and come up with some different alternatives, because I think most people would agree that Medicare is set to become undone at a quicker rate than Social Security, and so I think we have more time there. But it's something, again, that is going to have to be addressed for future generations. Again, if we want to save the programs for ourselves and for our future generations, and if, as important, we want to balance our budget. So that's what we're doing on the budget front. With respect to regulations, again, those of you all who have an interest and experience in HR and in the private sector, I think most people would agree that our job loss is the biggest issue facing the people in the 5th District. We've got to do everything we can to create jobs in this country. Unfortunately, for far too long, we've made it more and more difficult for employers to be successful because of the number of regulations and the number of costs associated, the government costs, the government mandates associated with doing business. And as a consequence, you have businesses that are literally taking very good jobs and moving overseas, moving out of this country because the climate is so challenging for businesses to succeed. I think you have a new Congress that is absolutely committed to reducing the number of unnecessary regulations that burden businesses. I know that we see that in our Financial Services Committee, which is the committee that I serve on. It's basically the banking committee. We are looking at one of the bills that was adopted this last session called the Dodd-Frank bill, which is an overhaul of the banking system, and I think has within it a whole lot of a number of provisions that make it almost impossible for small banks, the kind of banks that you see all across Southside Virginia, to survive. And so we are looking at ways to reform the Dodd-Frank law so that it is not does not present those challenges, and instead of being a barrier to success, instead encourages success. So I'm committed to that. You know, I loved the time that I spent traveling around the 5th District and during the campaign, and now as a member of Congress, visiting with the businesses and the farmers who make things happen, the folks in the private sector who actually create jobs. I've really enjoyed that opportunity because it helps me better understand and remember who it is that will ultimately get us where we need to be in this country, and that is the private sector. It's not the government, and I believe that completely. What I'd like to do is I'd like to open it up for questions and a dialogue with you all, but let me close by saying this. It is really wonderful to see such a fine group of young people here. You know, this last election, again, I think was very much about old people, in as much as it was about getting back to some of the founding principles that made this country great. Whether we're talking about liberty, whether we're talking about free enterprise, those founding principles that made this country what it is today. And if it weren't for the vision of those founders and the sacrifice of every generation since that time, we wouldn't be here today. But while this election was about history in many ways, it's also more important about the next generation. I have 3 children, and they're 12, 9, and 7. And I can tell you that Kathy and I, my wife and I, we spent a lot of time making the most difficult decision we've ever made together, and that is whether or not to undertake this task. As difficult as it was to arrive at that decision, we also realized during the process that it couldn't be more important, not for us, but for our 3 boys and for the children and grandchildren of all the people who live and work here in the 5th District. It is absolutely about the future, and I am grateful for the fact that each of you is here to hear about what's going on in Washington, and I hope that you will stay engaged, that you will continue to be engaged in the political process. It will not work. It will not work unless you all make it work, and that's the founding premise of this country. It's up to us as Americans. We want a better country to demand it and make it happen, and we can do it. I find myself